in November, on Ward Talk, Mayor Heafji said that the city started cutting back in 2001, and that Ann Arbor does not have a large financial problem. From your perspective as an accountant, how has the city managed what you talk about, its declining revenues and what has happened to our debt and our general fund? Our general fund is the major topic that our administrator, Mr. Frazier, always brings up.
Well, first of all, since 2001, I mean, for most of those years, the revenue has gone up, and it's gone up faster than inflation. I mean, in the last year or two is the first time that we're just seeing it flatten off. So all you have to do is just keep your dollar expenses the same, you know, and you would be okay. So I'm a little mystified when, you know, when we talk about all of these cuts, because if you go and look at the actual spending, I mean, they talk about cuts to the budget, but the budget cut is a cut from what they'd like to spend, not a cut from what they spent last year. So the cut, you know, when you go and look at the numbers, and certainly through 2008, audited financial statements, every year the city gets more money and it spends more money. I mean, and its spending has by and large gone up at least as much in inflation and sometimes more.
Because the city has cut the number of employees from
Yes.
1,002. So isn't that a major expense? Are employees a major from the?
But they cut someplace here, so they cut our basic services, but then they turn around and spend it someplace else, like the police courts building.
So is that out of the same pot?
The police courts building if you want to talk about the general fund, the police
Yes.
courts building is going to come out of that that pot.
The general fund, because what I think is confusing is that in spite of the cut to the fire department, right, 13, and the cut to the police, right, and the cut to the general staff from approximately 1,000 to under 800, still, you know, there's talk about closing the senior center, Mac Pool, the firemen have been pink slipped, and yet the city has money for Fuller Road Station, which used to be called FITS, right? And through the Economic Development Fund for Google, for the parking, something like 400 spaces. And through the Water Department, we're planting trees. So can you explain how we have money for some things, and then we don't have the money for our police and fire? How is this?
We have the money for the things that this council thinks are priorities. And the council majority think priorities are building a new police courts building, building a new underground parking structure that is going to be a subsidy for a hotel convention center. But they don't think it's a priority to maintain basic police and fire service, to repair the stadium bridge. I mean, it's a question. I don't think it's so much there's not enough money. It's you don't, I mean, at last year's retreat, a year ago, so in January they hear all of this bad news. In February, so the next month, they get a letter from the city engineer saying the stadium bridge beam is deflecting and hunks of concrete are falling off onto State Road below. And 5 days after getting that letter about the bridge, they voted to go ahead and borrow $55 million for a new underground parking structure, and Mike Anglin was the only council member that voted no. I mean, it's bad choices. You don't respond to, I'm in a recession and my revenue is going down, by let's go out on some expensive building project that isn't necessary.
Well, they were saying that the police courts building was necessary, that we didn't have an alternative, you know, right.
Well, then they should have, Mike Anglin again introduced a resolution that says, I want council to instruct the city administrator to talk with the county administrator about keeping the courts there. The majority of council refused to pass that resolution. So I don't think there was ever any good faith intent to work out something else. They wanted a big building. And if you go to a2docs.org and start reading the emails, you will see, you know, in some of them that is very much, that was a priority. And they were willing to push that, and if it required cutting basic services to pay for it, they thought that priority was more important than keeping basic services.
I do remember also a comment that the decline in revenue or potential revenue was seen just as a bump in the road, that they didn't understand that this was going to be more severe, perhaps, although there were some who did say that it was going to be a more severe downturn that the country was experiencing.
Well, I mean, forget the country. Michigan has been in a recession for years. And you had a housing bubble. I mean, if anything, Ann Arbor didn't get hit as hard as some places because it never got inflated. But one of the things, at the retreat a year ago, Tom Crawford spent quite a bit of time predicting what the tax revenues would be, and he didn't talk about that at all, and so I don't know how much effort he spent in his projection for what fiscal year 2011 revenue would be. But I mean, he's projecting quite a bit of decline. If it's flat, you know, then we're going to be, you know, quite a bit better off. But the commercial real estate market hasn't crashed. And has not crashed yet locally, and I think a lot of people are afraid that that's going to happen. And one of the things that will time it is you will have a commercial project, they will have borrowed money, it's not generating enough revenue to pay the debt, but the bank will hold it for a while, hoping that it will, because they don't want to write off their loan. I mean, that makes their books look bad. And where usually push comes to shove is then when the loan rolls due, because commercial loans don't last as long. In fact, an example of that is the DDA. The DDA was formed in the early 80s, just about the time, I mean, Ann Arbor was having a new downtown boom. So they were formed, and they subsidized some development projects. One was Tally Hall, that was just a total disaster, and one North Main has survived better, but it went through several bankruptcies. And what was interesting, when they went for their renewal, they had a chart that they showed the taxable values of what they captured, and they only just get the stuff from the new construction. And you saw it going up, and then about 10 years into their existence, it started going down. And that tells me that those new projects were going through bankruptcies. The loans were coming due. You couldn't sell them as much, and so the values were going down. So you subsidized all this development. You caused a bigger overbuilding, and you probably had a bigger bubble. But there still was about a 10-year delay. So I'm hoping that the housing market will have recovered before this other stuff crashes. But
okay.